Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare
By steadfastly steadfastly distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, the members of the Krishna conscious movement were experiencing the essence of loving service to Krishna and separation, which is the highest spiritual ecstasy. Don't try to see God, Srila Prabhupada's Principal had often said, but act in such a way that God sees you. In other words, by submissively acting on the order of the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. Prabhupada's disciples were sure to attract Krishna's loving attention. The quickest way to catch Krishna's attention, Srila Prabhupada said, was to direct another person to Krishna consciousness. The book distributors, therefore, felt a special reciprocation with their spiritual master, and this impelled them to go on serving and distributing Sanjaya. Philosophically, we saw that going out and distributing books was what our spiritual master wanted us to do. We knew that. That was clear to us. We also had a real sense of idealism, that these books and magazines would change the world. Once you come to Krishna consciousness, you actually see how crummy the world really is, how really contaminated things are, how envious people are, and how horrible material life is. You can see that. You don't feel that you yourself can change it, but you feel that whoever gets one of Prabhupada's books and looks at it will be changed in a spiritual way. There was no question about it. We also felt a big change would come in the world in the future as Krishna consciousness spread. Prabhupada also said that if people just touch one of these books, their lives will change. Our faith was in the books and Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 17, entitled Mother Parvati Curses Chitraketu, text.
11 onwards, but 13 as a purport.
Okay. So shall I just go through the Sanskrit till we get to 14 then? No?
Yes, please.
I'll just read the translations.
Yes, please.
Okay. So text 11. The goddess Parvati said, alas, how has this upstart now received a post from which to punish shameless persons like us? Has he been appointed ruler, carrier of the rod of punishment? Is he now the only master of everything? Alas, Lord Brahma, who has taken his birth from the lotus flower, does not know the principles of religion, nor do the great saints like Bhikkhu and Narad, nor the four Kumaras headed by Sanat Kumar, Manu and Kapila have also forgotten the religious principles. I suppose it to be because of this that they have not tried to stop Lord Shiva from behaving improperly. Text 13. This Chitraketu is the lowest of Kshatriyas, for he has impudently overridden Brahma and other demigods by insulting Lord Shiva, upon whose lotus feet they always meditate. Lord Shiva is personified religion and the spiritual master of the entire world, and therefore Chitraketu must be punished. By Srila Prabhupada. All the members of the assembly were exalted Brahmins and self-realized souls, but they did not say anything about the conduct of Lord Shiva, who was embracing the goddess Parvati on his lap. Chitraketu nonetheless criticized Lord Shiva, and therefore the opinion of Parvati was that he should be punished. So we'll go into text 14. Nayam ahati vaikanta Nayam ahati vaikanta Padam mulo pasapanam Padam mulo pasapanam Sambhavita Mati Stabda Sambhavita Mati Stabda
Bhavitamati sabda
Sadhuvi
sadhuvi
pariyupaspasitam.
paripasitam
Sadhuvi pariyupasitam.
sadhuvi paripasitam
Nayam ahati vaikanta.
nayamarati vaikunta
Padamulo pasapanam.
padamulo pasarpanam
Sambhavitamati stada.
bhavitamati sabda
Sadhubi parayupasita.
sadhuvi paripasitam
Nayam ahati vaikanta.
nayamarati vaikunta
Padamulo pasapana.
padamulo pasarpanam
Sambhavitamati stabda.
bhavitamati sabda
Sadhubi parayupasita.
sadhuvi paripasitam
Nayam arhati vaikunta
nayamarhati vaikunta
padamulopasarpunam
padamulo pasarpanam
bhavitamati sabda
sambhavitamati sabda
sarvipasitam
sadhuvi paripasitam nayamarhati vaikunta padamulo pasarpanam sambhavitamati sabda sadhuvi paripasitam nayamarhati vaikunta padamulo pasarpanam sambhavitamati sabda sadhuvi paripasitam nayamarhati vaikunta padamulo pasarpanam sambhavitamati sabda sadhuvi paripasitam
Ladies,
nayamarhati vaikunta padamulo pasarpanam sambhavitamati sabda sadhuvi paripasitam
translation. Oh, sorry. No.
na
I am
ayam
this person. Ahati deserves Vaikuntha Padamula Upasapanam.
vaikunta padamulo pasarpanam
The approaching of the shelter of Lord Vishnu's lotus feet.
the approaching of the shelter of Lord Vishnu's lotus feet
Sambhavitamati,
sambhavitamati
considering himself highly esteemed.
considering himself highly esteemed
Stabda,
sabda
impudent.
impudent
Sadhubi,
sadhuvi
by great saintly persons.
grace in person
Pariyupasitam,
paripasitam
worshipped. Translation: this person is puffed up because of his achievements, thinking I'm the best. He does not deserve to approach the shelter of Lord Vishnu's lotus feet, which are worshipped by all saintly persons, for he is impudent, thinking himself greatly important. Thinking himself greatly important. But by Srila Prabhupada ki jai, if a devotee thinks that he is very much advanced in devotional service, he is considered puffed up and unfit to sit beneath the shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. Again, this instruction by Lord Chaitanya is applicable. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than a straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. Unless one is humble and meek, one cannot qualify to sit at the lotus feet of the Lord. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chaksharan Militam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manodam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Vedati Swapadantikam Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Paditanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, funny enough, this is what I'm in my reading as well. I actually go right the way through. And when it gets to the beginning, I go right the way through again. So I've read a few, which is interesting because when you initially read this, you think, wow, well, he's being critical, so Parvati's made a good judgment, and therefore he's going to get his comeuppance. So, but then you read a few down, and it's a whole different perspective. And so it's interesting how you can see you can make judgments. Once you've made a judgment, then there has to be a punishment generally. That's what follows. Non-violent communication is all about don't judge people, because if you judge them, then you'll have to have a punishment for them as well. So if you want to have a non-violent interaction with someone, you have to abandon judgment. So here there's going to be some violence, there's going to be a heavy curse, which turns out to be a blessing placed upon Chitraketu. And by the way Chitraketu responds, Parvati realizes she was wrong. And then Srila Prabhupada says something very heavy about women, which we won't go into just now. We'll leave that for the next person who gives class. And they were having a joke because he was saying this, Chitraketu was saying this about Lord Shiva, but Lord Shiva had been pulling Chitraketu's leg about going around with all the Vajrayana women. Prabhupada mentions that in the next purport. So they had like a nice rasa there. And the saints didn't say anything, they were all like, and it was only Parvati that came in. So Srila Prabhupada, anyway, he uses this as an opportunity to say, well, you can't actually qualify for being under the shelter of the Lord unless you're humble. So it's an important part of the chanting process that maybe sometimes we neglect, because unless we tend to be very process orientated. So if we're saying the full mantra and we're hearing every syllable, then we're doing the process. What's the problem? The problem is you may not be doing it with humility. And if it's not with humility, then you won't be qualified to take shelter, to sit beneath the shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. And in Kali Yuga, the Lord's lotus feet is the sound vibration of the Maha Mantra. And your qualification for situating yourself at the lotus feet of the Maha Mantra is your humility. So I had an interesting thing by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He said, do not be rattled by this person. Somebody was quite offensive in the Gaudiya Math, and he left very hard-hearted. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur referred to us. He said, do not be rattled by this person. We do not see very much good fortune coming to him in this life or in many others in the future. But anyway, chant the Maha Mantra, even if without faith, most attentively. So why that's interesting is because if we can chant the Maha Mantra most attentively, personally speaking, I think I'm doing really well. But that's like the bottom rung, you know, at least most attentively, if not with faith. So then we examine, well, what does that mean with faith? So faith would imply that there would be a certain amount of knowledge there, a certain amount of realization that of our position and the Lord's position, which would then mean a certain level of humility. So when Lord Chaitanya is saying, chant humbly, think yourself lower than a straw, in a street, be more tall than a tree, It's an easy thing to just rattle off, but to actually, and that's why Lord Chaitanya is saying we should, because the default is we're not. It's kind of, for definite we're not thinking aloud in the straws. For definite we're not more tolerant. So he's saying we should be. And then if we're chanting, because the Maha Mantra is eternal, there's no beginning or end of the Maha Mantra, then it's constant. I mean, in one sense, we're only really chanting the mantra once a day, but we're doing it 16 rounds of it over and over again to try and chant that mantra properly once a day. And even then, we don't sometimes manage it. That's why Lord Chaitanya recommended 64 rounds. One lack of names, or he wouldn't eat in the house of that devotee. And then it was later on, it was brought down to like the really minimum, 16 rounds. And Kadambakana Maharaj was saying if it's less than 16 rounds, what does he say? You're on the slow boat to China. So if you say, well, we've cut it down already, 75%, let's just keep chopping it down, That seems to be the thing to do around here. If you're in a chariot, just chop it down. I say just do 4 rounds and everything will be fine. Well, you're on a slow boat to China. So 16 is the bare minimum, but actually, the actual standard is constant. Kirtaniya Sadhari, it's constantly chanting. And if you chant properly, then even when the bead bag goes down, because you have that humility, then you'll be situated at the Lord's lotus feet constantly. And because you're constantly situated there, then you'll be constantly chanting the holy name. So we're chanting 16 rounds to get in the groove, so that throughout the day we're with the Maha Mantra all the time. And the Maha Mantra is compared, Shiva Ramaj compares the Maha Mantra to the king with his entourage. And in Sudha Bhakti Chintamani. And if one makes an offense, especially if he makes the terrible offense of Vaishnava Aparad, then the king kind of ushers the person to go to the back of the entourage. And then the person, it said that the person will feel devastated, because even though he's in the association of the devotees, he'll feel like he's lost the association of the devotees, which will be very devastating for him. But then Shiva Ramaj says, but if he continues on in all humility and accepts his mistake, then in due course of time, he will be reinstated in the Lord's good graces. But that may take some time. And in between, then he may feel orphaned. And that's the Lord chastening his devotee until he appreciates. Immediately Tripiketu immediately appreciates. He immediately accepts. And that's another kind of side benefit of chanting. With Haridas Thakur, he knew when the prostitute came, he knew who she'd been sent by, and he knew that she was going to become a devotee in a few days. He already knew it. He even said to her, I know that you've been sent by such and such. So when we're chanting nicely, then we get put in the picture of what's going on. So Chitraketu, he wasn't disturbed because he realized that this is an arrangement so that I can go back to Godhead quicker. And he was even encouraging Indra when he was in the body of the demon, Ritasura, that just, it's okay, you just do this. And it looked like Indra was being victorious, but actually Ritasura was being victorious because he was going back to God, and Indra was going to have to stay here in the material world and carry on. So this whole section of Bhagavatam is an interesting shift in paradigms. Things are shifted around all the time. This is what it looks like, but this is what's going on. This is what it looks like, but this is what is going on. So chanting Hare Krishna is meant to do that for us automatically, actually. That there may be an environment where there are seeming defects or problems, and then we chant, and things get shifted around, and we suddenly realize, wow, I have an opportunity to do this. I have an opportunity to fill in this gap. This devotee is failing in this way. I have a service opportunity here. I can help him make the system in some way. The Christian consciousness is always very proactive, and the victor is the alternative to the victim. So in Krishna consciousness, being a victim doesn't work, actually. It's always to be the victor. But you can only be the victor if you renounce being the victim. I mean, if anyone had a good excuse for being the victim, it was Chitriketu. I only made a joke, you know. I mean, he's done it to me. What's the problem, you know? But he didn't. He just immediately accepted. Okay, I'm not the victim. I'm the recipient of some special blessing, some special mercy. It's going to come my way, and that's exactly what happens as the story unfolds. So Srila Prabhupada says in a letter that the secret of Krishna consciousness is to understand that whatever situation I'm in and whoever I am with is the Lord's special mercy upon me. And there is a tendency for us to think I could be better somewhere else, doing something else with somebody else. And that's the case wherever you go. You can go on an easy journey to the temples all over, and you still take the same heart and mind and karma with you, and so you still have the same problems. And also in the association of the devotees act as the vehicle for your karma. So I was reading this the other day by Dasa Swami in Greetings, and he's saying, for a second, abandon all the people that are giving you all the problems and see them as just vehicles, and just relate to your emotions as being the result of your past karmic reaction, and that they're being reduced to tena kampam shushukshamano. They're being greatly reduced by the mercy of the Lord, and accept that it's all your fault. Quite a tall order, actually. But that's what he's asking, at least as an intellectual exercise. We could try that, and then we can get out of this blaming. And this is illustrated in the next few purports, that blaming is not a good thing to do. So somebody that has a developed level of consciousness is able to see the hand of the Lord, and therefore he doesn't blame. Anyway, the next purport is really good. Whoever gets the next class, it's a really nice one. So the person is perfect because of his achievements, thinking I am the best. He does not deserve to approach the shelter of the Lord Vishnu's lotus feet, which are worshipped by all saintly persons, for he is imputed, thinking himself greatly important. So a real judgment there, a real analysis of the person's attitude and behavior, and then in with the punishment. So and so Srila Prabhupada is just emphasizing that the devotee is actually very humble, and that this is the lubricant for the mechanism of devotional association. Unless the humility is there, then the mechanism won't function very nicely. And by learning this humility, then it's a very useful way to socially interact. Rupa Goswami is explaining we can be humble even to people who are not committed, mentally at least, then with the body, and then with our heart and mind, with those that are advanced enough to be able to give the direction. So that's the challenge, is can you find that shelter, and can you take that shelter? The Diksha should also be giving the Shiksha. If you have Diksha and then you reject and take Shiksha somewhere else, then that's unauthorized, because you're supposed to take the Shiksha back to the Diksha Guru and say, well, I was advised to do this, what do you think? The Diksha Guru says, I don't think that's a good idea, then okay, it's not a good idea. Otherwise, the disciple is compared to a prostitute, and the prostitute will just go around and try and find where she can have best customers. Well, this one pays well, so let's hang out with this one. So it's called cherry picking. That you can read a lot of things in Srila Prabhupada's books, and you think, I really like that bit about the. Like you could even read this pastime, well, I like this bit. Yeah, he's getting punished and he's not being humble. That's good, But then there's another cherry a bit further on, which is completely different, So depending on what your agenda is, if you're going cherry picking and you've got your menu, we need 3 of those. Oh, there they are. Because you're going to cook something up. You've already decided you're going to cook something up. You're not going to take all the cherries because you've got your own recipe. So have 3 of those. And what was that about? There was one disciple of Srila Prabhupada, he put a book together. Shri Koditaya Maipashashi Ki Jai. And it was full of all the quotes which Srila Prabhupada was saying that it's okay to have intimate relationships with women And he showed Prabhupada the book, and Prabhupada looked at him and was really disgusted. He said, "You used my books for this?" So you could go through, you could sift through, and you could find just the cherries that fit in with what you want to hear. And that's why whenever people make statements or take statements actually from Srila Prabhupada's books, we have to think, is this contextually what Srila Prabhupada is saying through his 80 volumes of books that he's left us with, his lectures, his Bhagavatam classes? Is this what he's consistently saying, or is this just something he's said, just giving a little perspective on things? So the contextual. And if you don't have the context, I mean, the context is really quite simple. You have to become humble. You have to follow authority. You have to chant the holy names. It's really quite simple. But it becomes complicated. Prabhupada one time said, it is complicated for the crooked, which is interesting because somebody can just get it really easily, and somebody else, they may be very clever, but they just don't catch it because they're crooked. So he said, complicated for the crooked, which is interesting because you'd think, well, if somebody is, very complicated, then surely they need a very, very complicated. But the solution is actually very simple. Just straighten yourself out, and you'll see it's quite simple. It's complicated because we have some other agenda. And then it may seem like the person who's crooked is more intelligent than the person who's simple. But that's not a qualification for attaining the shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. Simplicity. Srila Prabhupada actually defines simplicity in one of the purports in the Bhagavad Gita as not being duplicitous. So not one way in front of the person's face and another way behind the person's back. And also not duplicitous in the sense that they don't go from one extreme to the other, they don't change. Vayudavikalpa, this mental vacillation. One way this way, one day it's this way, the next day it's totally the opposite, the next day it's totally the opposite again. There's 6 forms of unsteady devotional service which Chakravarti Thakur explains in the Vidura Kamini. And there's Vishaya Sangara, which is fighting with sense enjoyment. Vayudavikalpa, mental vacillation. Utsamai, false confidence. Garanga Tarala, sporadic endeavor. And Nimam, something which is the inability to be able to follow rules and regulations properly, to properly commit. There's a lot of obstacles there before the service becomes steady, along the way. But if we have that humility, then it stands us in good stead for whatever other shortfalls there may be there in our devotional service. And then there'll be less chance of making offense. The great challenge is the Kanishta's journey to the Majjhima platform, because the Kanishta being a neophyte has a tendency to fight. And because of that fighting, there can accrue so many reactions that he never really gets to the Majjhima platform, he never really gets to being steady and gets free from these unsteady forms of devotional service. But if he's humble, then although he may have some criticism in his mind or some fault that he can see, because of his humility, he'll be saved from making any type of an offense. And then when he comes to the Majjhima platform, where he's steady in his devotional service, then he'll be able to see things properly. Who the devotee is, who the non-devotee is, who the innocent are, and who the demoniac are. It'll all become really clear. Just like we may experience sometimes when we're on Sankirtan, when we first start the day, we see a horde of hogs coming at us down Buchanan Street, and we don't know who to approach and who to avoid. And then we start applying ourselves and making some endeavor, and suddenly everything goes crystal clear. And we can see who the devotee is, who the envious is, who the innocent is. And immediately we get this Majjhima clarity to be able to distinguish and then engage people accordingly. I mean, in one sense, you could say, well, we approach everybody, we give everybody an opportunity, but we lend the ability how to be able to discriminate what type of an approach the person will need, what will inspire that person, that only comes by the grace of the Lord, and that's an empowerment that can be received. I've experienced, especially on book distribution. It's really, and it can get to the point where you become so, and that's why a marathon is good, because you break through these barriers, and then the next day you get up and you start from where you left off the day before, and then everyone you touch just tends to go, and you know exactly the right thing to say to the things that you would have never said about the book. Like Mahaprabhu was doing books. He said, "This book show you read this book, you'll never commit suicide." She says, "How much is the book?" She came back on Sunday, a week later. She said, "You saved my life. I was on the way to commit suicide." She said, "I've never said that in my entire life. I've never said it before or since. But I gave you the book, and I just said, this book. You read this book, you'll never commit suicide." And she said, "I read the book, and I became convinced not to commit suicide." So that's the Lord stepping in and speaking through us. We have that amazing privilege, actually, on Sankirtan, to be directly used by the Lord's hands, and He will speak through us and direct us to say what that person needs to hear to bring them closer. We're an amazing service. It's like being, practicing as a guru practice, book distribution. And Vacha Vegam Manasu Kroda Vegam, Jiva Vegam Udara Vegam, Ehan Vegan Vishahitira, Savam Akiman Prativim Shishishat. So everyone should learn to control their senses, and then they're qualified to make disciples all over the world. Which doesn't necessarily mean you're going to give people a banana on the street and get them to throw it into a fire and give them a different name. But it means you're going to initiate them in spiritual life. It's like the purest form of conception. We give up mundane sex life. And then conception can be that you meet someone who's fertile. And because you're potent in your own Krishna consciousness, you're able to transmit spiritual knowledge, which is able to take birth in that person, and then they change. They become a different person because of your intervention. So then you can have millions of children. Any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So you were describing how it's difficult to understand the actual purport of the Srimad Bhagavatam, because as you say in the 6th canto, there are many different perspectives that we could take, and that sometimes we're convinced that the verse is presenting a particular perspective, but then we see that several verses later, the opposite perspective is being presented.
That's why we need to know the context of Srila Prabhupada's books. Otherwise, we can go off on a tangent. Yeah.
So, as far as I understand, because of that difficulty in understanding the Bhagavatam under the Vedic, under the Gaudiya Vaishnava literature, then really intensive study is recommended, and intensive study in the association of other devotees who've studied intensively. So,
Srila Prabhupada was talking about this more, and he was saying, because one devotee was saying he didn't want to do any service, he just wanted to read, and when he becomes realized, he'll do service. So Srila Prabhupada says, that is okay, he can do that, that is also working. He said, but make sure he's not sleeping. If he is sleeping, then better he just doesn't work. So he was qualifying it. And one member present was very annoyed this devotee would only chant. He would say, well, I want you to do some service. He said, I'm chanting today. And he went to Srila Prabhupada and he said, this devotee will do any service. All he does is chant. And Srila Prabhupada goes, chanting is the highest service.
So in that regard, then, how can we be sure that we have the necessary level of appreciation of the complexity of? When you say complexity, is not a sign of.
Well, yeah. If the question is how will we, whatever comes after that, how will we, whatever we are going to do, then it would come back to this point that Prabhupada is making, that we need to be humble, in a humble state of mind, devoid of false prestige and ready to offer respect to others. Whatever it is that you're tackling in Krishna consciousness, this is the universal prayer every day that we say, please today make me humble, make me more tolerant than the tree, help me to show respect. And then if our understanding isn't correct, at least like with Parvati, later on she felt ashamed. Now, if she'd have thought beforehand that I'm just going to be humble here and tolerate this, then later on when Lord Shiva explained, we were just having a joke, I pulled his leg about the Vijayatara ladies, he's pulling my leg about this, it's okay, he's a great devotee, he's had darshan of Sankirtan, and everything would have been fine. So this is illustrating the point. When you don't understand something, don't jump in too quickly. And certainly there is never an occasion for judging, criticizing, and cursing a devotee. Better to always be on the safe side and be humble. You don't suffer by being humble, although it may seem like you will. So whatever the question is, how will this, how will I be like this, how will I deal with the complexity of understanding the intricacies of the purport of the Bhagavatam, how will I chant the holy name attentively, how will I go back to God in this lifetime, how will I please my spiritual master and follow his instructions implicitly, where will I gain the sufficient, all these questions, how this, how, the proactive response to everything is, well, be humble, consider yourself lower than a straw on the street, be tolerant, more tolerant than a tree, ready to offer all respect to others, and look for no respect for yourself. That's like the essential solution to whatever the complexities of the problems are. The problems are less complicated the less we are crooked. If we have a crooked heart, then we will find complications and complexities, and things will be so difficult for us to decipher and to understand. But if we have the simplicity of heart, and our agenda is only to surrender completely at the lotus feet of our spiritual master, and please Srila Prabhupada, then life is very simple, actually. I mean, Jayananda Prabhu, the other Jayananda Prabhu, Prabhupada's disciple, you heard some of his association? No. But he was quite simple, he wasn't like really pondering over the complexity of the purport of the Bhagavatam. He kind of got the essence, you should empty the bin, get up before everybody else, work harder than everybody else. He kind of got it, That's what you be loving and kind to everybody else. So he kind of reached the conclusion. And then for others that are struggling, well, I just can't get my head around why this happened and why did that person say this and why did they? Well, the conclusion is go and empty the bin. Go and do some service, go and work hard, and you'll go back to Godhead. So Jayananda Prabhu, he didn't read so much. He just worked really, really, really hard. So we kind of come to that conclusion, maybe from previous lifetimes. That was the and so by the association of devotees like that, and hearing about devotees like that, then we can save ourselves a lot of time and come to that conclusion. Selfless and surrendered service. And it's interesting, actually, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada isn't so much talking about understanding. It's just accepted that there's so many complexities in the material world, and trying to understand everything is just such a laborious process. So let's circumvent the understanding process. And Srila Prabhupada is saying, to sit beneath the shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, which is a different take on understanding, isn't it? Because we have a tendency to think, well, once I've worked this out and worked that out, and I can put that with this, and this will bring that conclusion. Well, no, what you can do, you can just situate yourself at the Lord's lotus feet. And all these other conclusions and philosophical ramifications and calculations and whatever, we can immediately circumvent that, because they're supposed to bring us there anyway, to situate you at the Lord's lotus feet.
Yeah. But it seems so much is dependent upon being humble. When we're humble, everything's sort of downhill. It's the obvious question then is actually how to become humble, because it seems like it's a prerequisite. To chant, you need to be humble.
Yeah.
But then, is something coming from past life, or?
Well, I just had an interesting. I wished Shiv Ramanuja a happy birthday, and he sent me an interesting message back. And he was being very, very humble. He's saying, "Please bless me. I need the blessings of the Vaishnavas so that I can attain prema. I've been practicing now for 50 years, and it still eludes me." And that's one of the symptoms of prema, that the person has extreme humility. So it seems that it's not that you reach the point of being humble and then you can be okay. That at last I'm humble. No, where's the arty? Somebody give me a garland. It's like, I'm humble. You can worship me now. I'm okay. But it seems that humility never lets you off the hook. It just increases more and more and more and more. As you become humble, you become more humble. And so, where does humility begin? Well, it doesn't end. It never ends. And where it begins is where the devotee. It's really only if the devotee gets the blessing of the Lord, he receives the Lord's mercy, that humility can start to develop in his heart, and then he has to cultivate that. It's interesting. Srila Prabhupada refers, and I always used to wonder about this. He who doesn't hate illumination, when it comes, there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and I was thinking, who would hate illumination? But we may be averse to humility. So when humility comes our way, the Lord arranges us now. This is a great situation where you can become humble. We may hate that. We may resist it. No, I don't think I want to go for that, because we don't see that is illumination. We don't see that the dawning of humility is illumination taking place, so the Lord is giving us mercy. So maybe what we have to do is rethink what our idea of illumination looks like, and what humility is. Recalibrate in our mind, so that we can start to grasp what that humility would look like. It's a practice. So when you're practicing something, you don't just wait till you feel humble. You can be waiting a long time. You have to practice it. So that means it's not going to feel natural. Practicing humility.
On the other hand, we have to be careful of not falling into false humility, because that's another form of pride. As we were talking yesterday, a devotee stood up in class and said, "Srila Prabhupada, I'm the most fallen." And Srila Prabhupada said, "You're not the most anything, just sit down." So if we're forcing some false humility because we want people to think, yes, he's very humble, and that also can be a detriment.
And that's why association of devotees is very important, because amidst the association of devotees, nothing that's false can remain. If you're given to feedback, then you may have some false pride, some false humility, something false, and you may not be able to see it, but you can be sure that through the association of devotees, they'll get that feedback. And that's another good reason why book distribution is so good, because people give you the feedback one-to-one. If you approach the person very proudly, very arrogantly, then they respond back to them. And if you approach them humbly, then they appreciate that and they like that. So they become your mirror, rather than blaming the people. The people are really terrible today. And you go across to the other devotee on the other side of the street, and you go, "I find them really sweet." And then you realize, it's me. I'm getting a reflection of my attitude and the way that I'm approaching people. So falsity cannot remain in the association of the devotees. So what tends to happen sometimes is the devotee will leave the association of the devotees because he would sooner maintain his falsity than be brought to reality, which is what humility is, isn't it, really? It's just reality, looking at things realistically. Jai. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. So this say devotee, he got the conclusion of reading Prabhupada's books that work hard than others, wake up more early than others, empty the bin, and so on and so forth. is there a tendency he might neglect then studying, reading, or anything? Okay, yes, I've got the gist, I've got the summary. It's like working hard and continue working hard.
Well, Srila Prabhupada says in a few places, only in a very few places actually, Sri Rama's quotes that in a Sankalpa Kamudi I was reading, that there are places where Srila Prabhupada did say, if you cannot read the books, then fine, just chant and work hard. It was only once or twice that he made that concession, but generally we should study the books. And so for Jayananda, that worked. For other devotees, we had one devotee, the one that has all the, goes around with all the shalagrams. He was in Manchester for a while. He's got like a mark on his head. He was on the Radha Damodar party. He knows loads of slokas, and he's really into Vrinda Devi. Anyway, the sannyasi, he used to be on the Radha Damodar party, and at that time it was considered almost taboo to read the books, and he'd just been selfish, just get out there and distribute the books. So some of the devotees used to hide behind the cars, so they were distributing it, and they used to hold the books out. One of them was looking, they would be reading, the latest, because it was only as the books would come out, they were distributing the books as they came out, so they hadn't even had a chance to read them themselves, and then to read them, they'd be looking around, see if the Sankirtan leader were, and he said, all the ones that did that are the ones that survived on the Radha Damodar party, and all the rest just burnt themselves out. So it's very important to study. I personally find very helpful that before you chant japa, is to read for an hour and then chant, so you have an hour of Shastra inside you. And then that kind of percolates in the mind, because Jiva Goswami explains, he says, to actually chant properly, Shravanam Kirtanam, there has to be Smaranam. You can't just hear and chant. You have to be remembering as well. And if you're not so advanced that you can just see Krishna in the holy name when you're chanting, then that study beforehand, that's your Smarana as you're chanting, And those points, they'll percolate and they can inspire you to really chant. So you're chanting, and then there's this amazing point. Even if you can't chant with faith, chant most attentively. It's like having the cows, and this is heading the cow. The cows, Bhaktivinoda Thakur refers to the mind as like having cows on the field, and you're trying to bring all the cows in when you're chanting all the different thoughts in the mind going everywhere, And you're like, at least chant most attentively. Come on. We're going over into this field over here with the holy name. No, we're not thinking about that. No, most attentively, come over here. And then you bring them over, So that's a very powerful meditation when you're chanting, which will override the distractions on the mental platform and then bring you through to the point where you can become absorbed in just hearing the sound vibration of the holy name. Jai. I'll finish there. Thank you very much. Iskon Govinda ki. Srila Prabhupada ki. Gaura Premanandi. Hari Bol.
His grace Adhoksaja Krishna Prabhu ki.